All right, today we are tackling a question that I think haunts pretty much every modern office. Why is it so incredibly hard to get any real, meaningful work done? We're going to break down the psychology of what's going on and the pretty surprising science behind why that constant barrage of pings and taps on the shoulder and meetings leaves us feeling so completely wiped out.
I mean, really think about it. When do you actually hit your stride? For most of us, it's definitely not at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Nope. It's in those quiet, solitary moments, right? When the world finally leaves us alone. It's this universal feeling, and, well, there's a very good reason for it.
I just love this metaphor because it hits the nail on the head. You can't just snap your fingers and be in a deep sleep. And you can't just snap your fingers and be in a state of deep work either. There are phases you have to go through. And one tiny little interruption, a quick question, a notification, it's like an alarm clock going off right in your brain, forcing you to hit snooze and start that whole process all over again.
And that, right there, is the heart of the problem. Our workdays are literally built on a foundation of these little alarm clocks. We call them the M&Ms, managers and meetings. They just chop our day into these tiny, useless little fragments of time, making it pretty much impossible to build up any real momentum.
So, what is it that we're actually losing in those moments? Well, there's a scientific name for that feeling of being totally and completely in the zone. It's a psychological state called flow.
This idea comes from the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And flow is that kind of magical state where you're so absorbed in what you're doing that you lose track of time, you forget to be self-conscious, and the work itself just feels good. It's really the peak experience of productivity and creativity.
And you know, flow doesn't just happen by accident. There's a recipe for it. First, you need crystal clear goals. You can't get in the zone if you don't even know what you're aiming for. Second, you need immediate feedback, so you know you're on the right track. And third, and this one is absolutely crucial, the task has to hit that perfect sweet spot between being challenging, but not so challenging that you feel like you can't do it.
And this table just illustrates that balance perfectly. See, if the challenge is way too high for your skills, you get anxiety. If the challenge is way too low, you just get bored or even apathetic. But right there, in that top corner, where a high challenge meets a high skill level, that's the channel of flow. That is where peak performance happens.
Okay, let's get into this, because this is where the whole story takes a really weird turn. We all know interruptions feel awful, right? They feel destructive. But what if the data told us something completely different? What if interruptions actually make us faster?
So this was the big question in a really fascinating study by a researcher named Gloria Mark and her team. They set up this whole experiment to figure out the real cost of being interrupted. They wanted to know if, say, an interruption about a totally different topic is worse than one that's actually related to what you're doing.
The results were not what anyone expected. First off, the context of the interruption didn't seem to matter. But look at these times. The people in the study actually finished their tasks in less time when they were being interrupted. About 2 minutes faster. I mean, that just flies in the face of everything we feel, doesn't it?
So at first glance, you might think, wow, maybe managers should just interrupt us more to make us more productive. But no, not at all. Because that speed, that supposed efficiency, it comes with a hidden and very, very steep price.
Okay, so this is where we peel back the layers and find out what's really going on. The study didn't just measure how long it took, it also measured how the people felt. And that is where the true cost of all those interruptions becomes painfully clear. First up, let's look at stress. The stress level for people who were being interrupted was significantly higher. That's a big jump, you can see it right there. People felt way more pressure and way more strain.
Next, look at frustration. Again, a huge spike. That feeling of being blocked, of being annoyed, of just not being able to get any traction. It was so much higher when their work was constantly being broken up. And finally, how hard the work felt. The exact same task, when it was done with interruptions, felt like it took way more effort. So they weren't just working faster, they were working harder, burning through so much more mental energy to get the exact same job done.
So here is the big aha moment. When we get interrupted, our brain knows we're losing precious time. So to make up for it, we subconsciously kick ourselves into overdrive. We start rushing through our work in those little gaps between interruptions. And it's that frantic, hurried pace that jacks up our stress, our frustration, and makes everything feel harder. We're basically trading our own well-being for a totally false sense of speed. You know, this insight, it changes everything. It completely reframes the whole conversation we have about productivity. The goal isn't just to be faster, it's to be effective and sustainable. So, what do we do with this knowledge?
So let's just pull this all together. We know now that constant interruptions are the #1 enemy of getting into that state of flow. We try to make up for them by working faster, but that speed is a trap. It just burns us out, making the work feel harder and more stressful. So, real productivity, it's not about frantically checking off a to-do list. It's about creating an environment where we can do deep, focused, and sustainable work. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Now that we know the hidden cost, now that we can see the data behind why a productive day can feel so awful, what are we going to do about it? How can we as individuals and, as entire teams, start to protect our focus and reclaim our time to actually do the kind of work that feels good and gets the absolute best results?